So thanks Mission team for joining. So the Wisdom Group, which is Mission's women's ERG group, we had an industry objective to hold an event around International Women's Day in Q1. So that was March 8th. And I don't think we could think of a better person to be joining us for this event today. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce Barbara Stewart, live from Toronto. Barbara is recognized worldwide as one of the leading researchers of women in finance. She is a chartered financial analyst with 28 years of investment experience. And over the past 11 years, she's been challenging outdated financial industry stereotypes and sharing positive messages about women and money in her rich thinking global research papers, where she quotes smart women from all ages, professions, and countries, and she releases them annually on none other than International Women's Day, March 8th. So thank you so much, Barbara, for being here today. With that, I'll pass it over to you to walk us through some of these success stories, and then at the end, we are gonna leave time for Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Eleanor and Atria, for this wonderful opportunity to share my research with you. And I just did have a big celebration, International Women's Day, as I always do, with my 11th paper released. So what I'm going to do to start off with, I'll take the first 20 minutes or so and just go through the high-level findings that I've had over the past decade of interviewing close to 900 women around the world now, from diverse ages, professions, backgrounds, and cultures. So all kinds of highly accomplished women. So I get to share this collective wisdom with you today. I'd like to start by sharing some context with you as to why I started doing this rich thinking research in the first place. I was working for most of my career in the investment management business, discretionary money management for entrepreneurs, very high net worth clients. And during the financial crisis, I was getting pretty depressed, like everyone. My colleagues certainly weren't very happy. Nobody wanted to open their investment statements. Our firm wasn't any worse than anybody else's, but nobody wanted to be down minus 15% in a month or anything like that. So when times like that happen and I'm not getting any positive feedback for my work, like most of us, I like positive reinforcement, I became quite withdrawn and quiet. And I would go home and read every night. And I just got super introverted and I started reading about women and money. And it had always been an area of interest because I had a lot of female clients in my practice. And I had couples and I had male entrepreneurs, but I had about a 50-50 split with the genders. And I noticed during the crisis that the sort of more panicky calls that I would get from time to time more often were from the male clients than the female clients. And a lot of the women would call up and just kind of say, hey, I know it's really volatile. How are you doing, Barbara? I'm worried about you. Are you coping okay? And I thought this is really quite interesting because we have all these myths out there that I'd always questioned, that women are risk averse and women aren't so interested in investing and women don't want to be involved or think about it. And I thought this is really a disconnect for me, because what I read about on bank websites and from other research houses about these kind of demeaning things about women and money, it just wasn't true in my day-to-day practice as a portfolio manager. I was dealing every day with so many strong and capable women who were investors. So I thought to myself, out on a run one day, I came up with this idea that how are we going to counter these negative messages that are so demeaning, and they're kind of across the entire industry and around the world. And I decided that because I'm a chartered financial analyst, I have some sort of credibility because it's the highest accreditation in the industry worldwide. I thought it's going to take somebody to put out a different type of research report. And because I was kind of bored at work and it was the financial crisis and no one wanted to talk to me anyway, I decided I'm going to travel around and interview really smart women around the world and quote them on their success stories with money. And it was just an idea to do one research report and release it on International Women's Day. This was in 2010. And I only asked one question that year, which I'll get into, but from there, it just kind of took off. I didn't have any kind of PR strategy in mind whatsoever. I was just doing what I thought was the right thing to do to counter negative messages with positive messages and try to change the narrative about women and money for the next generations of girls and women to come. It ended up getting a lot of media. I ended up getting asked to speak in the Nordic countries because they were sort of the front runners in gender diversity and all of this. And then it just became a thing kind of globally when CFA Institute decided in 2015 to put my research on their site. And then they sent me traveling all over the world. I've spoken to close to 100 different events for CFA societies globally, banks, various stock exchanges. So it's just been great. I've been on pause doing these Zoom things these days. So it's a little bit, I've caught up on my sleep, but I'm ready to get back out there like probably you guys are too. So here's some high level findings. There's 10 or so. To narrow it down after 10 years, it's hard. I have a lot of content and I just have to kind of go with the speaking points. So number one, early on, I learned that when it comes to women and money, actions speak louder than words. What do I mean by that? Most of the surveys that banks and investment firms put out when they're surveying their clients or their potential clients, they always seem to ask women, are you confident with your finances? And I'll tell you what I learned. Most women will say, I should know more. I definitely should know more. No matter how capable the women are or how many degrees they have, you can try this out on your own. Ask a woman if she's confident with her money. And I swear, the vast majority, including just about anyone, even if they have a master's degree in law, finance, economics, whatever, with a huge job and they're really successful, they'll still say something like, I should know more. I'm not doing as good a job as I should. And women tend to be quite self-deprecating. So I'm trying to push back on this. So my research has always asked questions that are more behavior oriented for that reason. So finding out where women actually put their money, where are they truly investing? Are they investing or not? Let's not just perpetuate the stereotypes. Confidence doesn't really have anything to do with it because we're all going to say we're not that confident. Let's find out if we're competent. And it turns out we are. And many other studies, other than my own research, have shown that women are excellent investors. In 2011, I decided to ask 50 really accomplished women around the world, how did you learn about money when you were growing up? And it was really interesting because 73% of the women said that they learned about money either through informal instruction from other people, like family and friends, or just life lessons, kind of school of hard knocks, trial and error, whatever you want to call it, but real life situations taught them about money, not really reading from textbooks or taking investment course or anything like that. So I found that the other thing that women are really into are stories. And this means watching podcasts, watching videos like what we're doing now, any kind of visual, women sharing information about their past. And that's why I think this rich thinking really resonates across the board, because that's how we prefer to communicate. That's a language that most makes sense to women. And so sharing is another huge thing with women. Relationships and family life are just central. So if you're trying to pitch an investment idea or any kind of pitch to a woman, it's way better to be sharing it in a language that makes sense to her, with a story, referencing other people that she might know, and that she can share with the next generations as well. SAS, or SAS, the global software firm, released this great report. You can download it. It came out a couple of years ago, called The Influential Advocate. And this is a key thing with women. It's about finding your BFF. These brands today recognize that women network and they share information. So if you can get a woman on side, she'll be your brand ambassador and she'll convince all her friends to do the same. So they in fact become your marketing department, whatever it is, especially when it comes to women and money. So the industry for forever has been communicating in this traditional way. And it's been entirely ineffective, which is why so many women have not been that interested in investing. It wasn't that they weren't confident or smart enough or anything like that. It was just really boring. You had somebody constantly repeating the same thing. You should invest in the stock market because over the long term, stocks will outperform bonds. Yeah, okay, that sounds good, but why should I do that? Like, make it more meaningful, tell the stories of the companies to get somebody to invest. So all this did, this kind of blaring out the same old messages over and over again, made some women feel guilty that they weren't investing because they didn't really want to take the time to bother investigating, or it made them feel like they just weren't that interested. So that is ineffective. And that's why the industry, I'm happy to say, not just this research, but a lot of other research that's kind of come along with the whole women's movement, if you will, over the past few years, has been really helpful in changing the way that we're communicating and storytelling. At the end of 2019, I decided most of my research is qualitative, doing these one-on-one deep dive, 1 hour long interviews. And I thought, you know, people, especially media, always like to know what the numbers are and what the data says. So I wondered if I could corroborate some of my findings. And it really was effective. So in 2019, I sent out a global survey. Over 200 women responded, of this really kind of highly successful women, which is the demographic that I go after. And the reason I go after that demographic, just to be clear, is because I want to share positive messages to change the narrative. And so I'm only talking to women that are accomplished, are successful in their businesses, in their lives, so that they'll give us the tips to help everybody else along. One of the big questions I asked in this quant survey was, what to you is the most important thing to get started? What is the most important thing to be a successful investor? And what advice would you give to other people, women and people? And over 45% of the people that I interviewed said, get started investing as soon as possible. That was the number one tip, not anything else. And that is certainly what I've noticed from everybody that I've talked to. You can be a complete novice investor. And if you just open up an online account, get practice, practice builds knowledge, knowledge builds confidence. It's kind of like just getting this feel for money that really, really is effective for people. I've been writing a lot over the last few years. I write for 3 different publications on a monthly basis, so please check out my site if this topic is of interest. It's barbarastewart.ca. CFA Institute, I blog for them once a month, and this article's on my site. She's the boss of her money, 4 trends in women's online investing. This is all about Facebook communities. It's about all kinds of social trading platforms, subscription-based model. There's one in Copenhagen called Female Invest. They are making money. They are independent. They're being sponsored by some of the major institutions. There's a lot of momentum now behind getting, especially the younger women, invested. And we're seeing that across the board right now, of course, especially during the pandemic, as people have had time to focus a little bit more on their investings. But it's exciting because there's so many places to go. It's much more accessible. It's much more interesting. You can get your friends inspired. And there's just kind of, it's just a way different space than it was even 3 years ago. Another big finding from my research is that women prefer to invest in causes and concerns that matter to them. And of course, the whole ESG space has just exploded. I first got a hint of this in 2013. I interviewed 100 women around the world that year, and I asked them, how are you investing your resources? What are you spending your money on these days? And I found out that most of them were spending money on things that really mattered to them. Yes, they had a traditional investment portfolio, but over 1/4 of the 100 women that I interviewed said that they were actually putting their money into a business or supporting the business of a friend, of some sort of cause that was incredibly important to them. So they weren't waiting for retirement. They weren't saving all their money up for retirement to get started investing, to start spending that money. They were spending it now on something that mattered to them. So When it comes to women, we can't always look at their traditional investment asset mix and figure out where their money is. They have a much broader definition of what investing means. So I coined the phrase female asset mix, and I wrote about that for CFA Institute too, because a woman's investment asset mix includes aspirational investments, it includes legacy investments, it includes save the world kind of investments. And she could be putting a lot of her money, a significant portion of her overall wealth, outside even the stock market. This study was out in 2017 by Capital Group, and it said, what do men and women investors want? And we keep hearing that, you know, the genders are so different. But when you look at this, if you see that the women are in orange and the men are gray here, the lines on the bottom three, funds that beat the market, funds that cushion losses, conservative investments, they're very close. There's barely any difference between what men and women want in terms of investments or investment returns. But where the huge percentage gaps are and differences are is up top, where women much prefer, by 20% difference, investments that promote health and wellness of their employees, of their consumers, investments that promote opportunity for women, gender equality, minorities, et cetera, really big deal. So that's definitely something that I found in my interviews as well. This woman, Susan McLean, is head of Mars Discovery District here in Toronto, which is an incubator sponsoring all these startups. And she is absolutely one of the smart women I interviewed, and said that while we're all investing in hopes of generating good returns, the fact that those returns can be supporting the changes that we want to see in the world, it's super exciting. I was offered a project, which turned out to be one of the best times of my life, in 2017, based on my rich thinking research. They said, Danske Bank, which is a big bank in the Nordics, said, can you do a special project for us and interview 60 ultra high net worth female investors and find out what's important to the customers of the bank. So I spent 2 years going to Stockholm, Helsinki, Reykjavik, Copenhagen, a lot of fun, and talking to very, very wealthy women to find out what matters. Now, this is just 3 years ago, and back then they all said that they wanted gender equality funds, save the world funds, and at the time, just 3 years ago, these types of funds didn't exist. Even the big banks in the world had no track record on gender equality funds or anything like that. And look at what's happening today. I mean, ESG flows last year were just massive. The Financial Times has been reporting the numbers. I've been writing about this also more recently. It's just been unbelievable. So obviously women are starting to invest and influencing their families. Another year, I asked 50 women around the world, what's the best idea you've ever had in your life? I always ask only one question, by the way, because I want to get like a lot of diversity in the answers, and so people can take and run with that question however they want, and that's what makes it interesting. And then I sit down with myself at the end of the year and I try to see if there's any common themes, which is the really creative part of this research. So I asked them all, what's the biggest idea you've ever had? How old were you when you got that idea? And what happened? And how did you invest in the idea? Did it go well? What happened? So interestingly, most women get their big ideas in their 30s and 40s, some a little bit later, some earlier, but the vast majority kind of 30s, 40s. And then I said, well, when did you start to work on it? So you're running along like I was with my idea to do rich thinking research. And I started working on it the very next day because it was like, this is so obvious. And I'm not alone in that. Right away, most women started to work on the idea when they had one. So smart women really take action. And then I asked them, how much money did you invest of your own money in your big idea when you had it? And that was a big surprise to me, because you might think, oh, you know, what kind of an idea is this? Some sort of knitting company or what? How great is this thing and how financially viable is it? Well, over a quarter of the women spent over $100,000 of their own money right away, financing their big idea to get started. So pretty serious. Another year, 2017, I was doing Rich Thinking Around the World again with another, always a different 50 women each year, by the way, I should make that clear. So that's how I've interviewed close to 900 now. This question was, how are you managing your money and why? And managing your money is different from investing your money. I wanted to get at, like, how do you kind of organize your finances? How do you discipline yourself to save, all of that kind of stuff? And it became very clear through these interviews that there were sort of three styles of managing money. One was like really structured, kind of three buckets. This is my short-term stuff, my medium-term stuff, and my long-term stuff. Proper organization. The second category was women that were super sophisticated and really strategic with their money, about using their money to make more money, kind of thing. And then the third category were sort of the artsies, the free spirits, people that really never thought about money. They knew they should be managing it, so they would outsource it to a trusted expert. But I was happy to say that that year, everybody was managing their money in one way or another. And there's sort of no judgment. There's no perfect way, as long as you're managing your money. If you're doing nothing or just letting it sit in cash, cash is, of course, the lowest performing asset class of her time, so you're not going to do very well. But the women that I interviewed, one way or another, were managing their money. And I'll give you a few examples in each category. Joanne Delaurentis, she's on the board of the Toronto Transit Commission, which is a hellish job these days. Like, nobody's taking that subway anymore. I'm laughing, it's really sad. Joanne told me that, she said, despite the fact she'd spent her entire career in the industry, she can't predict markets, and none of us can. So she said the way that she manages is she disciplines herself to have a direct deposit from her paycheck into her bank account once a month of a certain amount, and she automatically invests that in her investment portfolio. Doesn't want to think about it, just wants to set it up that way and focus on the other things in her life. Structured strategy. Ariane Bukai, who's now a global head of tech, media, and telecom for Deloitte, she told me that she wants to make the most of every penny. So her goal is to have what she called a leverage effect. And the whole idea with her is always to be thinking about how can she leverage the financial opportunity with her real estate. So she's got several real estate holdings, and she's just constantly moving money from one to the other, and like totally sophisticated. And we had more than one like that. And then the musicians, and this lovely Eleanor Frey, who's become extremely successful even since I met her. I met her 4 years ago. She's doing so well. I think also musicians, some of them got really creative in the pandemic, and she's been doing all of these Zoom concerts. Look her up if you're at all interested in classical music. She has some amazing performances online. But Eleanor and I talked about money, and she said she's thinking about money every single day, but she knows that that's not her thing, because she wants to be an artist. She is an artist, and she wants to invest in her art by making sure that she can put out CDs and music and concerts and all of this. But she realized that she did need somebody to manage her money. So she spent quite a bit of time interviewing different money managers, found one that she really trusted, and that's it. And now she's making more and more money, but it's being properly managed. So as I said, one way or another, they're all doing it. This is probably the slide that gets tweeted around the world most often, and it also is the number one reason why I started doing this research. I really hated that sort of stereotype that women are risk averse. And I always knew it was incorrect. And it's also very demeaning if you think about it. Why would we accept that mantra? It's just ridiculous. You could say any number of things, but I came up with risk aware. And I think it's a lot nicer way of saying that this is a very positive skill set, that women might take a little bit longer to make an investment decision. They're doing their homework. They're very detail oriented, generally speaking. And once they've done their homework, they will take very calculated risks. And I know this also from working in the investment industry, because if they're interviewing different investment firms to manage their wealth, they'll take longer. But when they decide, they're going to be the most loyal customers any wealth management firm or any industry will ever have, because they've done their homework, because they're risk aware. In the quant study that I did, I decided to test that notion out as well with the 200 women around the world on the survey. And it checked out perfectly. I gave them 4 choices. How would you best describe your tolerance for risk? Risk averse, I'm risk aware, I'm a risk taker, I'm a risk seeker. It turned out that just under 10% of women said they were risk averse. So that means 90% are perfectly willing to take risk, or at the very least are aware of risks before they're taking them. And taking that one step further, I asked them what percentage of their overall assets do they currently have in the equity market. And this is a year ago now, this data. And it turned out that over 75% of the 200 women were invested nearly fully in the equity market, which is one proxy for taking risk for sure. In 19, I asked 50 women around the world, what are your top tips for business success? And this is a long story. And here are the top 5. Be a lifelong learner, speak up, form deep relationships, always remember your why, and follow your inner voice. And when you look at these top 5 tips, as I did at the end of the year of all these interviews, I thought, well, they seem sort of obvious. And maybe if you Google top tips, probably they would come up somewhere else. Somebody else has thought of these top tips before. But what's different about my research is I share the background stories that go along with the top tips. So you can read about why someone decided that speaking up was the most important thing. And I love all the stories. And that's what I think really resonates with the women that I talk to around the world, and why people like to share this research. Because whether you're having a panel discussion or whether you're just talking to some colleagues or a friend, you might find that one of the stories about speaking up and how someone figured that out, you might be going through exactly the same thing, or some of the women in the research, it might just resonate with where you're at in your own situation, which sticks with you a lot more than just Googling top tips and going, oh, I should do this. But understanding the background is awesome. The overriding thing I would say of the decade of rich thinking research has been the idea of financial independence. It's become the dominant theme across the board in all of my interviews and conversations around the world. Perfect example is this woman, Cheryl Rezin, who's head of tech and life sciences at Torrey's, a big law firm in New York. And she put it very succinctly. She said, my father ingrained in me and my sister the need for what he called FU money. And this kind of money allows you to walk away from a bad boss or a bad relationship or a bad job, bad client, whatever. It's about, I make my own money and I make my own decisions. And that equals freedom for so many women. Definitely the number one thing. And we're seeing now, even in the world of advertising around the world, I used to see only men in investment firm ads. You're probably noticing that this has shifted dramatically. The majority of ads everywhere feature women for wealth management now. So Wealthsimple is a big firm, social trading platform and investment platform in Canada. They're also in the UK. This ad says it all. It's just the messaging, take care of yourself, because this resonates with women.